Since Ukraine's Kursk invasion, Russia has been having a military crisis. It doesn't have enough troops. You see, before the Kursk incursion, Russia had only put soldiers on this front, basically the front line of the Russia-Ukraine war. But now that Ukraine has brought the war into Russia, Putin has to defend his whole border with Ukraine just so he's not embarrassed again like in Kursk. But Putin doesn't have enough soldiers to man the whole border and continue the offensive in Donetsk. Though he does have a few options to increase his army size, all of them come with their own headache. And worse yet, while Putin is panicking to make a decision, Ukrainian troops are capturing more land in Kursk. Putin has pulled back troops from Ukraine to return to defend the lines in Russia. Soldiers have been relocated from Zaporizhia and Kherson in Ukraine to save what seems to be Russia's failing defenses. So, for the first time in over 2 years, Russia finds itself on the defensive in its war against Ukraine. So today, let's go over what Putin will do to defend Russia and how he will get more soldiers. I do want to clarify something, as some of you said that I was lying in one of my previous videos. Putin's hackers are targeting YouTubers. You can go watch it yourself, as John Green recently shared a video that he and his brother's email account were compromised. Now, it's not far-fetched to think that he is disliking YouTube videos that are critical to his war. After all, it's been exposed many times that Russia runs millions of bot accounts just to spread its propaganda and bury criticism. That's why it helps me out a lot if you guys can take a second and hit the like button down below. Alright, let's start. Of course, this all started with the Kursk invasion. August 6th just might forever go down in history as the day that everything changed for Ukraine. A small cohort of about 1,000 brave Ukrainian soldiers marched into the Russian region of Kursk. Luckily for them, there wasn't much resistance. After all, Russia was too busy trying to take over Ukraine's territory to worry about defense. With no fight at the border, the group was able to push in and cover much ground in the first week. Reports now show that they have completed their capture of Kursk and are moving towards Belgorod, which is approximately 87 miles from Kursk. Though now that progress speed has slowed down as Russian soldiers are not just surrendering as they did in the start. Nonetheless, this has already been a huge embarrassment for Putin, and it has been now causing him some domestic headaches. Putin has tried to play it cool, claiming that this is all a feeble attempt by Kyiv to end the war and it will fail. He has already started with his threats, claiming that the West is responsible for this and that Russia will be mounting a worthy response. But rather, Putin is now being forced to do exactly what Ukraine had hoped. Ukraine aimed to force Russia to divert troops to Kursk, and that is exactly what happened. Russia has already started pulling troops back from Ukraine to help defend against the invasion on its own soil. Putin has instructed his military to drive out the Ukrainian forces that are in Kursk and Belgorod. To do the dirty work, he's appointed Alexei Dumyan, his former bodyguard, as the leader of the operation. Moscow is on the defensive. Russia removing units from Zaporizhia and Kherson is symbolic, because these were the first territories to be captured in February of 2022. Kherson in particular was a major early victory for Russia. This territory was strategically important because its position gave Russia access to the Black Sea. The army would use this access to send soldiers and supplies, and this is what ultimately allowed Putin early victories in the war. Ukraine is also hoping that if Ukrainian troops can push deep enough into Kursk, it might force Putin to pull troops from Donetsk. This city is crucial to Ukraine because of its economic importance and its strategic location. Its positioning makes it a transportation hub, and its proximity to the Russian border makes it critical for military movement. If Ukraine can regain access and fortify it, it will weaken Russia's hold and gain back some ground. Even if Ukraine does not retake Donetsk, what it has done by its attack has stretched the front line. Up until this point, Russia had an advantage in that they could concentrate most of their force on specific areas, while Ukraine had to allocate their troops over the entire front line. This new attack means that Russia now has to stretch its resources over the border of Belgorod, Kursk, and the Bryansk Oblast. A stretched front line means a stretch of resources plus logistical nightmares, and right now, this is not what Putin wants at all. Let's address something that's been on my mind before we move forward. After watching my videos or other YouTubers' videos, I'm sure some of you guys have thought about starting your own channel. One of the biggest hurdles people face when starting a YouTube channel is that they are not comfortable showing their face in videos. Not everyone wants to give up their privacy and be in the public eye all the time. That's one of the big reasons why our videos are made in a documentary style. The craziest part is, people still love the videos, as you can see from the fact that we recently crossed 1 million subscribers. In fact, there are millions of faceless YouTube channels making content and earning ad revenue. In just the last 3 years, YouTube has paid out $70 billion to creators. That's around $60 million every single day. So if you're someone who's interested in starting a YouTube channel, right now is the perfect time. That's why we've launched a completely free 7-day email crash course on how to start and grow a faceless YouTube channel. If that's something you're interested in, you can sign up now for free by clicking the link in the description or scanning the QR code on the screen. All right, now let's get back to the topic at hand. Due to this stretch in resources, Putin has to slow down cross-border attacks and refocus resources. In all likelihood, this is going to allow Ukrainian soldiers to regroup and redeploy near Donetsk so they can block Russian troops. If Russia keeps focusing its efforts on removing Ukraine from Kursk, Kyiv could send more soldiers to Donetsk and really push Moscow back. On top of all this, Putin has an even bigger problem on his hands. The West's attitude towards Ukraine's attack on Russia means that a lot more of these attacks will be coming. In May, when Russia attacked the Kharkiv region of Ukraine, Joe Biden allowed Ukraine to use American weapons on Russian territory. Previously, this was only allowed in certain instances in specific regions. As the war continues, the boundaries and rules will become lax, and Ukraine will soon be able to retaliate to the fullest extent without fear of getting told off by the international community. With Ukraine gearing up and fighting back, what does the longevity of Russia's military power actually look like? The initial military force was made up of volunteers and people who had been mobilized specifically for this special military operation. Plan C was the conscription army, where young Russians who had gone through mandatory military service but were not part of the war in Ukraine would join in. Now, mobilization is not popular among Russian citizens, and Putin is well aware of the public opinion. Ideally, Russia wants to work with volunteers because they actually want to be there. The problem is that as the war progresses, no one is really about to be putting their hand up to step into the fight. There are attempts to make the job more attractive by adding bonuses and other nice incentives, but people aren't really into it. So that cuts off the volunteer pool. On the other hand, another round of mobilization at this stage of the game is really not gonna work. Mobilization happened in 2022, and the army really wrung out its soldiers to the extent that most of them only left the front line if they were injured or dead. So now Putin will have to turn to the weakest branch of his army, which is the conscripts. All they have is some basic training, but these 250,000 soldiers could be Russia's last resort at this point. Russia has already begun to move some of its conscript units to the Ukrainian border already. The use of conscripts is being done carefully because Putin does not want any trouble with the Russian people. Judging by the reaction they received from this first attempt, Russia is more likely to send more of its conscripts to the front line. Some reports have actually shown that Putin might have already been using conscripts near the front line, as soldiers captured by Ukrainian forces have included newly conscripted men who are getting their first taste of war right in the center of the action. Russia's military force has already reached rock bottom, and they are calling on their conscripts to stand in the front. Keep in mind that these are poorly trained civilians who are putting their lives on hold to fight a war. It's a sad thing. If you keep thinking about this seriously, one of the greater problems would be that even if Moscow could raise the number of soldiers they want, they may not even have the equipment for all of them to stand on the front lines against Ukraine and mount a strong enough defense. So even if Russia is able to give its army of conscripts everything it needs to fight the battle, what quality of fight are we actually looking at? The current units had a level of experience that you just cannot replicate or teach in a couple of months. That would spell a massacre. The army may have to rely on its limited ammunition and vehicles because the manpower is honestly not at its best. This gives Ukraine a fighting chance because, to them, this is great news. If Ukraine is strategic enough, it can target the conscripts and cause damage there. More deaths mean the public outcry from Russia will also backfire on the government, and whichever way you look at it, the Kremlin will be in trouble. We may be dreaming here, but if pressure from the Russian public is enough, Putin may be forced to end the war. What puts Putin in an even more tricky situation is the attitude of the soldiers to the war. He cannot go for much longer if his soldiers are not behind him. Let us share some stories to help you see how dire the situation is.
The soldier filming this is trapped. He belongs to the Black Beret Marines from Russia's elite 155th Brigade.
In 2023, the Marine Brigade, known as the Black Berets, were given a mission to invade the town of Volodar in Ukraine. After their mission, the Ministry of Defense announced that the troops had successfully reached the village and captured it, but the reports on the ground were different. They complained that the government had sent them on a suicide mission and claimed that over 300 men were killed, wounded, or went missing. They were treated as collateral, and their experience pushed them to write an open letter demanding an investigation into the mission. In this letter, they complained that their commanders rushed the attack, and when they approached from the woodlands, the enemy was waiting for them. The terrain made them easy targets, and video footage shows how easy it was for the Ukrainian government to utterly demolish them. After suffering more defeats, a second letter was written to the governor explaining more mistakes nearly cost them their battalion. More tactical mistakes were revealed, and the soldiers were receiving many blows from Ukrainian drones and soldiers. This specific brigade is not the only one with complaints. In communication with family back home, Russian soldiers have exposed the battlefield failures, the terrible conditions, and the issues with the government. The morale is really low among the soldiers, and Putin might have to think about what he's going to do with his unmotivated military force. 3 brave Russian soldiers in Ukraine custody were interviewed by CNN and exposed the true nature of life on the battlefield. The constant shelling and bombing have kept the soldiers up and caused them many nights of trauma. The soldiers admitted that the morale was low among their numbers and that the Russian force was on its last leg. These men are Russian convicts turned conscripts who've been given a way out by joining the war. They tell horror stories of the Russian government treating them like they are disposable and simply throwing anyone into the ring. These conscripts were only given 2 weeks of basic training before they were sent to the front lines. They were told that their role would be to simply hold the defensive line at the liberated territories. But they got more than they bargained for. They were immediately sent to the front lines and spent weeks hiding out in foxholes and fleeing the Ukrainian soldiers. And to make matters worse, their artillery was not working, and their grenades kept misfiring. Another contract soldier had a horror story of his own to tell. After having served his time in Kherson, when he tried to return home, he was threatened with more prison. More disappointing are the stories of the terrible commanders who mismanaged supplies and got high off the painkillers. Then we have some soldiers saying that they were sent out on bogus missions that left them exposed and without support. We see that Putin wants to pretend that everything is fine on the outside. But investigations and reports show that his army is slowly caving in. The reports of foul play by conscripts and mobilized soldiers alike tell a story of disgruntled forces that will not be fighting diligently for much longer. There are cracks in the Kremlin, and if Putin is not careful, the walls are going to come crumbling down. While his men on the front lines suffer, Putin is taking resources meant for the war effort to protect his own palaces. Imagine that. Just read this tweet and see how far off he has fallen. The Ukrainian attack has shaken Moscow. But more than anything, it demolished Putin's reputation. The strong man is now being seen as a weak man who let his guard down and left his country vulnerable. No one ever sees the underdog coming, and that's what makes their blows more deadly. What is the future looking like for Russia? On the international front, their president's military failures have taken their reputation as a military powerhouse down a notch. He can no longer hold his head up high or garner the same amount of fear and respect that he used to. At home, his people are unhappy, and the Russian economy is suffering because of the Western sanctions after the start of the war. But this is not the end, and Russia still has a bit of fight. Putin's back is definitely against a wall, and in a sense, that makes him more dangerous. I'll be on standby updating you on how this situation develops. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.